Hello and welcome to this special Rovers Chat live stream tonight, where we're going to be looking at the big topic on all Rovers fans' lips at the minute, replacing Tony Mowbray. It's not going to be an easy job for whoever takes it, but we've got a couple of guests here and one more to follow later, and we'll be asking that question. How do we replace him and where do we look? So first of all, introduce my guests. Alex, nice to see you again. Pointing that way. There you are.
Good to see you, Glenn. You're going to make me kind of put some good suggestions forward after calling for this for like months now, so I better actually come up trumps here. But yeah, in all seriousness, it's good to kind of discuss the key thing, and I think after 5.5 years, it's really important that we get this decision right. So I think it's a good thing to dedicate a bit of time to discussing. So yeah, looking forward to this tonight.
Yeah, we'll come on to the timing in a minute because it does seem a bit of a weird time to be talking about a new manager when there's already one there. So we'll kind of hold that thought for now and come back to it in a split second. And we're also joined by Elliot Jackson from Lancs Live. Elliot, nice to have you on board. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Good stuff. We'll be looking to pick your brains, what you know, what's going on down at Brockhall, what's going on at Ewood. Let us know if there's anybody we should be having a crafty fiver on as well that you might know about. And for everybody watching, do get in touch with your comments to this video and we'll dip into those as we go. So just looking, we've already got kind of 8 comments in there, so we'll dip in those. We've got quite a few kind of candidates to look at. So as your candidate comes up, we'll dip into your comments. So we'll look at the situation. Let's start with that. So we're in a kind of current limbo at the minute where we've still got a game left to play. The season's not over, although it pretty much is for us. Tony Mowbray is still the manager. He's not been told he's not the manager. He's kind of announced himself that he's probably not going to be the manager. It's just the really bizarre situation, which kind of feels like I've jumped in a time machine and we've gone back kind of 5, 6, 7 years to kind of the chaos years, as we call them, the circus years. Alex, what's your thoughts on the situation at the minute? You touched on it before.
I mean, my first reaction to finding out that he had no contact with the owners whatsoever was that we were kind of back to the circus years of early kind of 2010s era, where you were having managers sacked every 15, 20 games based on, 1 or 2 bad results. So that was a big concern. But I think it's probably what Venky's have always done is that whenever a manager has fallen out of favour under their ownership, you kind of get that cutting off of communication. It happened with Gary Bowyer, who had been there for quite some time. He suddenly stopped flying out to India. The communication ceased. And things kind of spiraled from there and he ended up getting sacked. Similar things have happened with other managers as well that have stayed a while. And this has happened with Mowbray as well. It seemed to have happened last season in that really shocking run we had in the second half of the season. And then over the summer, it seemed that they would have sacked him had he not had to be paid out of his contract. And so it seemed like after that great run we had in December and January that communication had restarted, the owners had regained faith. But I think as the season's kind of unravelled again, that communication stopped all over again and we're kind of in this situation. What does it tell me? It tells me that probably behind the scenes, the owners are doing what they've always done, which is run the club in their way. It's not the way that we want them to run it, but it's the way they always have run it. And what I think will be interesting to see will be who actually makes this next appointment. Will it be the owners directly? Will it be the board in England who make a recommendation, which is then accepted? All of these things are kind of really in the dark at Rovers. We're kind of the most difficult club to kind of analyse in that way. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But what I would say is that someone who has advocated for Mowbray to leave, I think the way that he's been treated has been very unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. I mean, even just to say, Tony, we're going to have a chat at the end of the season. We're going to discuss it at the end of the season after the last ball's been kicked. Not even that, not even a conversation of any sort, which I just think isn't the way to conduct a football club, really. So that's where I would kind of make my opening remarks on the situation. I'm in favour of him leaving, but I think the way that they've gone about it isn't the best at all, and I don't think it reflects on the club very well. When you look at social media and you see like the 600,000 views that interview's got with Mowbray and his coffee and all of that. So, yeah, I'll leave it there and I'll let I'll let somebody else have their say on the situation.
Yeah, I think you're right to point that out as well. Like, we are talking about who's going to take his job, but we're trying to do this in a respectful manner. Like, as Alex has said, you might not agree with how the season's turned out or whether he was still the right man, but we've all got the utmost respect for the man and kind of look at where the club was when he took over 5 years ago, and we're kind of languishing at the bottom of the league. We didn't really have a plan, and he almost keeps us up, and you go down and you think, oh, how's this going to turn out? He manages to get us back up at the first time of asking, which I think we probably look back in hindsight now and think, you know, that's a pretty good job that, given some of the clubs that are still stuck down there. And then he stabilised us in the Championship, and he's got fans back. The club's more engaged with the community than I've ever known it to be. And I know that's not down to Tony Mowbray, but the manager obviously helps with that. And to just kind of not even have that copy and paste statement of, like you say, we'll talk about it at the end of the season, or yeah, time's up, we're going to move on, but thanks and for all your efforts and stuff. It just seems a little bit. I just don't like it. Is probably the best way to put it. I'm a massive Tony Mowbray fan. That said, I do think it's time for a change, and it's kind of taken me a long time to come to terms with that decision. But yeah, it was emotional at the weekend seeing Tony for the last time, probably. But I'll bring you in here now, Elliot. So sorry, I've had you sat on the side there waiting. So what's I know you're probably a little bit of a difficult position having that link with the club from a kind of journalism point of view. But how do you see the situation at the minute and how it's potentially going to turn out?
I think I would agree with both of you in the sense that I don't think the main thing for me is this isn't about whether this is the right decision or not. The overriding thing for me is it doesn't matter what your view is on Mowbray, whether you think he should leave the club or they should offer him a new deal. The fact there's not been been any conversation whatsoever or any contact, I think, does borderline disrespectful, perhaps. If I'm being completely honest, after 5 years at the club, I think that to have not had any contact, even if it's just to say, look, Tony, we appreciate everything you've done for the club after 5 years, but we're going to go in a different direction, new voice. 5 years is a long time in club management. To not have that conversation, I find very strange, and that was the question that Andy put to Tony at the end of the press conference, which obviously created the video, which went viral, as you say. Looking back, that video was a bit weird to watch back on because obviously I was at the press conference and everything, and it didn't feel as emotional as it did when I watched it back afterwards, and it did seem a lot more so, which I found, I don't really know why that was, which I found a bit weird watching back. It felt a bit more raw potentially in person perhaps, but yeah, that was interesting. But it will be very interesting to see what they do with the next manager. I think Tony Mowbray's done a very good job overall over the 5-year tenure. I think that it's very difficult to judge because I think ultimately if you muddled the results up this season, I think a lot of people would say it's a good season. If we're being honest, I don't think anyone expected Blackburn to finish in the top 8 or top 10 before the start of the season. That said, there's little to excuse when you are second in the table on February the 8th and you go on the sort of run that Blackburn have and obviously drop out the championship playoffs and become mathematically impossible of reaching them. So I see both sides to it. I still think he's done a good job this season, ultimately, with a streamlined squad. You look at the players that obviously left in the summer, who went down a very different route. And there's a lot to work with for the new manager. I said this on my own podcast last night that went live this morning, that there's still a lot to work with this core group of players. It just needs either a manager that's going to come in and invest in those young players and give them the time they'll need to develop, or it needs a bigger budget if you're going to bring in someone like a Daniel Farke or someone that's got a proven track record that expects to be competing right at the top of this division. It needs a bigger budget to complement that because they obviously had a decent-sized budget in the first 3 years or so, spent $5 million on Brereton Diaz, Gallagher for decent money as well and decent wages. But that's dried up in the last few years. They've relied on loans or clever bits of recruitment and younger players. And I don't necessarily see that changing massively in the summer. Who knows? We don't know. Obviously, COVID's impacted the whole of the championship. If you look at the championship market in general, it's gone stale. Nobody's spending any money in the championship unless you've got parachute payments. Fulham, made up 50% of the championship money that was spent in the summer. So unless you're doing that, you're not going to spend any money really at the minute. So it's not flowing through the division, which creates a ripple effect. And with the shortened summer, I do worry that clubs in the championship generally will be so reliant on Premier League loans, and that's going to be even the gap to get your recruitment if you are relying on that market. Unless you snap up players early that are on free transfers, if you're not proactive with that, I don't see loads of business being done through the middle. It'll be sort of at the beginning when free agents get snapped up, I think, and then sort of near the end when Premier League teams have finalised their squad and they're willing to let players go out on loan. That's not just a Blackburn problem. That's a championship-wide issue that I can foresee. So the shortened summer probably comes at the worst possible time when you think Rovers need a new manager, a new head of recruitment, a new captain in all likelihood, a new midfielder, and probably might end up selling Ben Brereton Diaz and needing a new striker as well. So I don't think that would be a disaster, but as Mowbray said at the weekend, it's how that money would be reinvested if Brereton Diaz was to be sold for the right money. How does that get reinvested? I don't think much, if any, of the Adam Armstrong money last summer was reinvested into the squad, and that would be the potential concern. So a lot going on. At the minute, it's going to be not going to be a quiet summer for me in terms of a writing point of view, which is a good thing, because these summer months are always difficult to find content to write about. But I don't think I'm going to be short of things to write about this summer.
Yeah, I'll kind of draw on a couple of things that you said there. So I've been frantically making some quick notes, and the Ben Brereton one's a bit of a weird one for me. If he goes, because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to kind of the financial stuff, as anybody who's ever seen some of the stuff we've done with Kieran Maguire before, I don't think he goes before the end of June, because then it ticks over into the next year's accounts. So we've got the Adam Armstrong money, and I think that's kind of shelved for, that's going to pay off some debt this year. That's going to keep us kind of...
A bit of COVID shortfall as well, and things like that, yeah.
Exactly. So then Brereton Diaz, if he does go again, I don't think that's going to be before the end of June. So from what you're saying, that's quite critical, because if we don't have a pot of money from that sale, all the free transfers are going to have gone, all your loans are going to be gone, and we're potentially going to be held to ransom. Now, to kind of come back to something else you said about there being a lot to work with, there's a lot to work with, but there's also, if you were going to change manager, I've been saying since kind of Christmas with the guys that I go to football with, it's probably not a bad time to want to make that change, because you've got so many players leaving. You don't need to overhaul the squad massively. There's a lot of gaps to fill to start with. So, yeah, some interesting points there. I think what you said about the season's absolutely spot on. If you'd have offered every Rovers fan, I think, would have took this position at the start of the season. It's just the way the results have fallen, with that peak of great performances around Christmas just before, and then the drop-off. If you sprinkle wins in throughout the season, suddenly, we're going to miss playoffs by 4 or 5 points. Actually looks like a good season. It's the timing of it that just seems to just be disappointing more than anything. But I still think we can be proud as supporters of how the team have performed. The Preston performance last week I talked about was probably the best I've seen us this season. I thought they were fantastic. But the Bournemouth game is kind of the still last chance saloon for the Bournemouth game, really. But they kind of showed their class, the money they've spent, and they were kind of a cut above for me on Saturday. I thought Billing in the middle, we never got close to him. I thought he was the difference on Saturday between both teams. And ultimately, that's why we're having this conversation about Mowbray, is he hasn't been able to continue that run to get us in the playoffs. My personal opinion is I think he'd have been going anyway, but it would potentially have been his decision to go at the end of the season, at the end of his contract, go back home, spend some time with his kids, maybe retire completely. But that's why we are where we are. So I'll come back to you, Alex. Seeing as you're the man who's been, let's say, not really wanting Mowbray here for much longer for a while, who do you want to replace him? Who's your favourite?
Well, I think obviously it depends on several things really about who's realistic to bring in. What is the budget going to be for next season? Because as Elliot said before, the money's kind of dried up a bit over the last 2 years or so. Money not being reinvested back into the squad. And if you turn Daniel Farke that he's going to come in, have to sell Brereton Diaz and then get £2 million to replace him, it's not exactly an attractive job to take, is it? So it really depends on the budget, and it's very difficult to tell because that's often kept quite close to the chest. The club don't reveal anything about budgets or anything like that. It's often a big shock when we suddenly bid for somebody. So if you're going for a more of a realistic bargain basement type manager, then you're probably looking at somebody like Gareth Evans, for example, who you know can work on a tight budget and have a team perform more than the sum of its parts. And obviously at Wycombe, you have that case where you have that small club from League Two is promoted into League One and then up into the Championship, and then he's done remarkably well. But obviously there's concerns about Ainsworth. Is it a bit like Keith Hill at Rochdale or John Coleman at Accrington Stanley, that you take that man out of that club where they have that formula and they can't replicate that somewhere else. So there's that big concern with Ainsworth. He's never managed anywhere else. So I would have to say that would be a big worry for me. And then other than that, in terms of cheap options, you have promoting from within. So somebody like Darian Johnson, for example, but I'm not sure that he would want to take the job. I think he quite likes the youth development side of the coaching, with the under 23s previously, and now as more of the kind of the youth development, like technical coach at the moment. So I wonder whether he would even be willing to consider taking the job. And then obviously your top tier managers are managers that are proven and have done it before. So Daniel Farke is the prime example of that. 1-2 promotions from the Championship in recent years. Plays a exceptional brand of football in the process. But obviously has the problem of getting to the Premier League and then being found wanting in terms of ideas. Now, I think Rovers would be more than happy to go up and get
I think that's the least of their problems right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think
deal with that down the road.
That's not a current concern with Rovers at the moment. So let's just be clear with that. So you have all of these names, and then you also have the fact that often with Rovers, the appointment comes out of left field completely. Coyle was sacked in February 2017, and then a day later, MOWBRAY was appointed, and MOWBRAY was not listed in the bookies at all. He wasn't even in the first 3 pages. He just wasn't there.
On there. Yeah,
and wasn't on there whatsoever, and then he was in the job the day after. So this club doesn't function like most clubs do, but if by the sounds of it that we're doing this interview process, then names may get released into the public domain and it may be more predictable than in the past. So they're just kind of 3 names to kind of kick things off in terms of names that you'd maybe think about. But it's difficult to say I'd go for this man without knowing the budget and the squad that they'll have to work with, because, as I say, it's a dynamic situation at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm going to take this opportunity to just dive into the comments because I've completely forgot up to now. So do keep putting your comments in. I'm going to dive into them. So we'll start at the top. So we had some very eager people on before we even started. So we've got RD 724. So I too would like Daniel Farke. What he did with Norwich was wonderful, and we need a switch in mentality. Is it bad that I would text Sean Dyche every day of the week? Unrealistic, but I have to agree with you. He'd be fantastic for us. Gritted teeth. I think it's different than when we appointed Coyle. So we'll move on from that and maybe come back to Dyche a little bit later. So keep tuned in. We have got some fantastic graphics we're going to put up, which are Blue Peter style, prepared earlier. But just with some kind of stats on the managers and kind of win percentages, odds, all that kind of stuff. So bear with us. We will come on to that. We've got Adam Davey, just after 8. I think Gareth Ainsworth would be very good for Rovers. Alex has touched on Ainsworth. We've got Gary Sowerbutts just after that. Ainsworth all day. We've got Michael underneath there. Ainsworth and Keep Johnson, who still knows the youngsters coming through. Ainsworth will put his heart and soul into the club, not just for a quick earner. I think that's key, actually. The Johnson thing you talked about was the kind of youth development, that side of it. Our biggest kind of asset is our academy at the minute in terms of the quality of players we're churning out. And you've lost your manager to lose Johnson as well. Would that be a double whammy there as well? So that is something we need to kind of take into account as well. We'll move on to the next one. So we've got Michael Pearson, Ainsworth or Robinson for me. I'd like Farke or Koku, but can't see it. Koku, I think, will come back a little bit later because I think he's dividing opinion quite a little bit, and I think that's mainly down to his time at Derby, but we'll come back to that. We got Matthew Shaw, #Farke in. Make sure I say that right. I've got Chris Chadwick after that. Farke should be the obvious candidate. If we can get him, we should. If Ainsworth did Darian Johnson as number 2 is the way to go. We've got FPL Hayden. Evening, guys. Farke or Darren Moore. So Darren Moore's Chef Wednesday still, isn't he? Yeah. As the Championship proven. That's why I'd be against Ainsworth, but I would have Darian Johnson as the assistant. So Chef Wednesday made the playoffs, didn't they? So that would be an interesting
They did. They finished 4th, yeah.
Yeah, that's a name that's not been mentioned yet. Is Moore Championship proven? I feel as though he was. Did he get ill once he got the job at Chef Wednesday?
He did.
He wasn't there.
He did. He was off for a period when they were in the relegation fight last season, and he's
COVID,
had
wasn't it?
a bit. Yeah, he's can't have his jabs, basically, for a bit of insight, because he's that bad, the reaction that he sort of gets. So he's very vulnerable to that sort of thing. So he was very ill.
But for me, Chef Wednesday went down because they weren't as good as admin as Derby, rather than being worse on the pitch. So take that what you will. FPL Dalmatian, Koku, you've got to be joking. And then good point from Gary Sowerbuts as well. You need to respect that MOWBRAY is still manager at the moment. I think, man, where should respect that before having an interview and training on Tony's toes, he deserves that at least. Yeah, we've touched on that before. I think if you'd have said after the Preston game, MOWBRAY is going to get a new contract, I'd have been all for it. And then after the Bournemouth game, it's kind of that swing in how the games have gone. And I think that probably sums up the fan base a little bit, is that you have the highs, but for all the massive highs, you have the pretty significant lows on the back of poor runs and performances and whatnot. So I'll kind of tie up in the comments here, and we'll get back to the chat with Elliot, give him his chance to voice who we'd like to see at the top. So Ian Sharrett, if there's a chance of getting Farke, go out and get him. Gareth Devlin, very pessimistic there with the we will get the pound zone option. Well, it could be free, because if he's not got a contract, it could be free somewhere. And we've got Michael Pearson with the super chat. Thank you, Michael. Anybody who wants to donate via the super chat, we would absolutely love that and appreciate it. Don't ask me how to do it, because I'm not very technically minded, but I may have to ask a glamorous assistant in the background how we can promote that. But thank you very much, Michael. And your comment there, we're always seduced by the sexy names, but when the reveal comes, it's like Scooby-Doo will sigh, oh, it's him. Yes, very true. Think back to the Coyle days, maybe the Berg days, the Appleton days. We've got FPL Dalmatian again, number 1 Farke, number 2 Manning, number 3 Ainsworth. I'll come back to you for chat about Manning, if that's all right, Alex. I know you have an opinion on Manning. And we'll just finish off with Duncan Eastman, first choice Farke, second choice Ainsworth, third choice Liam Manning, fourth Koku, PSV form, not Derby. And I think that's probably the key thing, as I mentioned before, his time at Derby is sort of split opinion of him because it didn't go too great. So I'll come back to yourself, Elliot. Anybody you've got in mind that you think is either suited to Rovers or you'd like to see at the helm?
Yeah, I'll caveat all of what I said and say I've been off for the last 2 days, so I've done absolutely no digging yet. So before anyone decides, nothing I say, this is all personal opinion. I don't have any insight at this point, or none of this is cryptic message. Someone that's not come up in any of the conversation or on the betting, which I don't know if it'd even be possible, but I think Mark Warburton is staring in the face, personally. I think he's done a brilliant job at QPR, and in a very similar situation to with Tony Mowbray in the sense his contract's come up. I think that he's streamlined that squad. He's got a good brand of football. He's worked with young players and developed them. And if you look where that squad was when he took it over and the way he's developed the likes of Rob Dickey, Chris Willock, Semi Dieng, Lyndon Dykes, who we obviously brought in for relatively cheap from Scotland, I think that if you want someone, I think if we were all being honest, I think Daniel Farke is the number 1 option. Do I think Daniel Farke is realistic without, as I say, I haven't done anything in terms of any digging yet? I would be inclined to say no, because I think that if I was Daniel Farke, I would want assurances on budgets and playing staff and things like that, the things Alex came up and spoke about a minute ago, which I think are absolutely what I would be wanting to ask if I was Daniel Farke or someone of that calibre who can afford to be a little bit picky, I think, with the Championship club he would dive into next, because he's got 2 promotions on his CV. Apart from Chris Hughton, he's probably had the most success of anyone that's available at the minute. And he's probably got a higher stock than Chris Hughton at the minute, given that he obviously bombed out at Forest. So I think Farke would be realistic, potentially depending on what the board tell him, what sort of budget they want. Do I see them going into the League One route and paying a compensation fee? My gut feeling is no, because I think Liam Manning would be probably next on my list. I think he's done a brilliant job at MK Dons. But do I see them potentially paying a compensation fee and obviously this is dependent that MK Dons don't go up, because I think if MK Dons go up, I don't think that conversation even happens anyway. I don't see them potentially paying a compensation fee at this moment. So for me, if you want someone that's available, realistic, has worked with young players, Championship proven, I think Mark Warburton ticks a lot of boxes. Personally, I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think when you look at all the jobs he's done, I think he's left the club in a better state than when he found it. Brentford, he did very well. He went into a tough job at Rangers and pulled them out from the 4th tier of Scottish football when they had to restart. And I think he's definitely left QPR in a better spot. Forest is the only one where potentially no, but we've seen a lot of managers crash and burn at Forest. And equally, I would also say I think he was sacked a bit prematurely only I think it was like December time into his first year that he got sacked by Forest. So I think that was early as well. So I think Mark Wilton is the obvious one for me that's not been mentioned. But I think Farke would be everyone's first choice. I don't even entertain Sean Dyche conversation because I just don't see why Sean Dyche would drop into the Championship. I don't think he's attainable for anyone in the Championship, really, unless it's a really big job. You saw when Chris Hughton left Brighton, he was the first name on everyone's lips, but he took 18 months before he was actually willing to drop in. And I don't see why Sean Dyche should have to drop into the Championship. Now, if we get 18 months down the line and he's not got a Premier League job, then he might well do that. But I wouldn't be jumping at the first job that's available in the Championship if I was Sean Dyche. So for me, that's a non-starter. Never mind the links with Burnley and everything else with that. Then you're looking at Daniel Farke. Depends on budgets and reassurances, because I would want reassurances with my track record if I was Daniel Farke. So and depends if they're willing to pay a compensation fee, which I would err on the side of potentially not. In which case, I think Mark Warburton probably potentially is less of a gamble than a Gareth Ainsworth. That's just someone that's not been mentioned that I would potentially throw in as my personal opinion.
So you've picked out the one man who I probably have quite an opinion on, because I'm not I don't have I think I'd like him. I like Farke. I think Farke is the perfect candidate, but he comes with a price. He comes with the chance that, like you say, he's in a position he can pick his job. So how do we know QPR aren't looking at him? Glamour of London, all that kind of stuff. But on Warburton, my opinion on him is he not Mowbray 2.0? Is he not keep what you're doing just with a different face there? I think he was at Brentford. I just feel like you've probably given the argument to what I'm going to say already with talk of Rangers, Forest, QPR, Brentford. I just feel like those teams took that next step almost when he'd gone. I'm thinking like Brentford.
I think that depends on budget and things like that, though. It depends what Rovers are willing to do, and I don't know where they're going to be. If the budget's the same as what Mowbray's had, then I don't know who would potentially come in that is a gamble. They're with this budget, they're almost near the top end of what they can achieve with this budget, with the teams that are going to come down. So it's hard to improve on that with this budget. And I think Walter's probably someone that could at least match that. Because if you go for a risk for someone else, I think there's more chance of it of falling down the table and going up on the current budget. So I think, going for a really big risk, unless you've got the money to go for someone like a Liam Manning, who I have been really impressed with, I think an Ainsworth would be a gamble potentially.
Yeah, I know we've said in our kind of Rovers chat is now the time as fans that maybe we want that gamble. And I'm completely with you. Is mid-table championship isn't the worst thing in the world. When you stay in there, you solidify. It's
not even mid-table though, is it? Top 10
no,
I think it's a lot different from sitting 14th, 15th, 16th. I think being in the playoff chasers with one match day to go is an extra step on that.
You want to be playing for something at the end of the season, which we have been up until 5 o'clock Saturday, which completely agree with you on. So yeah, I kind of leave my thoughts on Warburton there. But I do think you're right. He's a steady set of hands, and he's proven to take teams maybe that next step, if it not being the final step to promotion.
Yeah.
But I suppose one thing, and I'll come to you with this, Alex, is how long does the next manager get? And it kind of ties in with what Elliot said about budgets. What's the expectation on is the expectation on the next manager? And I know you don't hold the key to this question, Alex, but is the expectation that we break the top 6, or is it that they're going to redevelop for 2 years or whatnot and then push for the top 6? Because you think about Mowbray, we were probably on Mowbray 4.0 in terms of his teams that he had. He'd kind of changed that squad so many times, the playing style. My worry is somebody comes in, we're not top 6 at Christmas. Suddenly people are, well, are we any better off? We don't know what we're doing, kind of thing. So I'll throw that open to you, and feel free to bring in your thoughts on Manning as well, because I know you've got an opinion on him.
I think it's a really interesting question. It kind of highlights one of the big concerns I have at the moment. And it's a natural concern, but I hope that we can avoid it as a fan base. I hope that the people who are generally pessimistic, and I kind of probably fall into that category, and the people who are upset that Mowbray's leaving don't club together to kind of hound the new manager, whoever that is, and hound them out the job in the first 4 months, because that would be a disaster for everybody. So what I don't want to do is that the manager has a hostile atmosphere from the first game, because we know how that ends with Coyle. It ends in disaster. So, Glenn, you're on mute.
Sorry, first one. So I think that's the key thing, is don't alienate the fan base by making an appointment that absolutely nobody wants. And I think they couldn't have picked a worse person when they appointed Coyle. Nobody wanted him. He came in, he was on a hiding to nothing. And I think
Who would be the current Owen Coyle equivalent, do you think?
I don't know. There
I
is
don't
one.
think there is. I think you'd have to bring him back
yeah.
again.
Keane.
You'd have to do like a Paul Ince equivalent where you just pull someone from it.
Yeah.
Alan Kirbishley comes back out of retirement.
No, I don't even think that's as bad. I think you'd actually have to bring him back for a second stint, I think, to get anywhere near it. But I think in all seriousness, it's got to be someone that the fans can get behind. That's where I think that the Ainsworth name is a safe name in the sense of everyone can get behind him because he's one of our own and all of that kind of thing. But I think it's got its own risks for the reasons I've said before about can he do it at another club? Can he do it when there's a bit more expectation in the Championship than just at Wycombe when it's all about staying in the league? So there's that big element to it. I think another thing as well in terms of what the expectation should be, it ties in with the budget. It all ties in with the budget and the transfer window. You know, whoever comes in has a decent nucleus of young players to work with. They're not walking into a club that is expecting to be finishing 23rd or 24th next season. You know, the players aren't bad. But if we don't have any money and we sell our better players, it may be a season where we are expecting to be in that lower mid-table area, 15th, 16th, to allow the new manager to have a season to find his feet. If we have a good transfer window, then people may be expecting a bit more of the new manager and maybe more mid-table, upper mid-table where we are right now. So it's very difficult to say. What I would say, though, is that I think what was fatal for Mowbray was last season was we got promoted from League One, we consolidated, we finished 15th, we then improved again and finished 11th. But then last season, when we stepped back to 15th again with the quality of players that we had, I think if you look back on Mowbray's time at Rovers, that's what killed him, is that because then to go from 15th to then challenging for the playoffs, it's a big jump that. If he'd improved a little bit again last season and finished 8th or 7th, we'd have had a better platform this season to kind of push for playoffs. So that's where we'll look back and regret Mowbray's time. So if you look at the new manager, as I've said before, all on the window, all on who we keep and sell, and all on the budget. And if you want me to maybe say a bit more about Manning, because I know you've asked me to do that a couple of times, but I think the reason that his name crops up for me is that I think he falls into that category of managers in terms of young up-and-coming managers from the lower leagues, which other clubs in this league have looked at. Preston with Ryan Law, for example, is a classic example of that. And I think the way that Manning appeals is that MK Dons were kind of mid-table in League One last season, and he took that squad that Russell Martin had before he went to Swansea and hasn't really added an awful lot to it in terms of big financial budgets or anything like that, and just kind of kept that style of play going and really had success with it this season and really improved the players that he's got within the squad. And not only that, he's also lost players during the season to other clubs.
He lost his goalkeeper and has still finished top 6. That's
O'Reilly went as well to Celtic, who was a massive player for them.
Exactly, yeah. He's lost key players throughout the course of the season and still finished on, was it 89 points, 87 points, something like that?
89 points, yeah.
Yeah, 89 points. So that's a really big achievement for a club that probably wasn't fancied to be right at the top end of League One. But that name has some risks to it. You know, at MK Dons, he works in a very set structure. The club is kind of run in a very specific way. At Rovers, the manager's job is much different. As I've said before, he's almost got to be like, do a 4-man job. He's got to be like the communications director, the head coach, the head of recruitment, and, you know, all the rest of it. So, and the key communicator between England and India. So all of those things kind of would make you worry about Manning in terms of, is it too early for him? Because this is a big job in terms of the demands on whoever takes the job. Not that I don't think he'd be capable of doing the football side of the job very well. So that's probably one of the main reasons why his name cropped up for me as someone to be interested in, because I think fans are looking for something a bit new, a bit fresh, a bit more youthful, if that's the right word. So, yeah, that's where Manning would come into play.
I mean, on Rovers appointing MK Dons managers, we've been down that route before, and it didn't turn up too great. But what I will say is that they went away to Plymouth, and I think Plymouth needed a result to get top 6, and they absolutely battered them. And it's the kind of result that you'd look at, and at the Rovers of the past 5 years would have been the Plymouth, not the MK Dons. And I think that ruthlessness and that kind of, we need a win, let's go get it. How many times do we look at a game and go, we need 3 points today? And then we stutter out the blocks and we end up chasing the game. Coventry away, for example, Reading away. Take any of those games and we wouldn't be having this conversation now, probably. We'd probably be pushing for playoffs. So for me, that's a massive sign of a manager. Is I think they were either already guaranteed playoffs or pushing for top 2 automatic. But to go away to a team that's also going top 6 and batter them like that it tells you something about the manager, that for me. So I'm just going to pull back to, we've had another super chat from Daniel. So thank you very much, Daniel. And Daniel's comment was, 2023 will be 10 points adrift in the relegation zone with Coyle Clone at the helm, Mowbray looking down on us with Middlesbrough in the automatics. So there you go. Pessimistic there. Maybe at Christmas, but you never know what will happen come May time. You know what he's like at Christmas. So moving on from that, and I'm going to pull on something that Alex has said about what the manager has to do at Ewood. So in terms of normal footballing club, the manager coaches, picks the team, manages the day-to-day football element. We all know that at Rovers, it's not that straightforward a job. And kind of going to put this one to you out the blue a little bit here, Elliot. Who's picking the manager for Rovers? Who's involved in that process?
Well, you would expect Sahale and Steve Waggett, who we've not heard, obviously, an awful lot from at all in the last few months. You'd imagine they will be doing the interviews, and they will be feeding back to the Venkies in India and having that discussion with them about where they want to go with the next pick. Just to build on what I said, I think if Rovers were going to pay a compensation fee for any manager in a job, Liam Manning would be the one for me. I would prefer him to Ainsworth, for example. I think the ceiling is higher, so I would agree on that. But Sahale and Steve Waggett, as far as from what we know in around the club, and they'll then make a decision with the Venkies on what sort of direction they want to go. Mowbray very much reports into those two, and they sort of the link people between the club owners and the manager in situ.
Okay, so yeah, that one of the big things for me is that who's the footballing people above Tony Mowbray. So if like a house of cards, if Mowbray leaves, does the whole stack fall down? And
I don't think necessarily. I think the structure is there, as say with Steve Waggett and Sahale, that rightly or wrongly they will be influential. I would expect in the footballing decision, alongside obviously the owners that will get final say and will obviously sign off on whatever the recommendation is.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And as you would say, that there is somebody there to make that decision. I remember, I can't remember who it was picked Coyle last time, but I remember it being between Coyle and Warnock, and all of a sudden Coyle got the job, and it was the outstanding candidate, as they called him. But we'll leave that in the past because I get PTSD if I go back over that again. So we'll come back to our kind of original agenda, and we have got some good graphics that we've got our glamorous assistant in the background got lined up. So we'll throw up the first one. So throw one at us in the background there. We'll kind of run with that. So Darian Johnson, a great start there. So Darian Johnson was a name that was thrown around a lot last season. So during the kind of February drop-off, people were saying at that point, kind of 2021, this is that now's the time for a change. Let's give Johnson to the end of the season. Bit of an element of give it to Giggsy to it, but let's bring him in, see what he's got to work with. For what it's worth, I think Mowbray was kind of given a free hit last season with COVID. He had another year on his contract afterwards. It was see what you can do. If we get playoffs, fantastic. If not, you're going to have another season. So Darian Johnson's there. We've touched on him already. So there's a couple of stats there. He's probably the only one we've got this graphic for that has matches not applicable, win percentage not applicable, and average points per game not applicable. But as the comments there say, he's a candidate from within. Johnson's been working within the first team coaching setup for some time now, having previously managed the club's under-23s team. His side won the PL2 Division 2 back in 2017-18, and has lots of success stories with plenty of now first-team players coming through under his stewardship. Some fans have suggested this is the internal appointment that could suit the club's youth development direction, which Tony Mowbray himself hinted at after the Bournemouth game. So Mowbray did give some kind of comments after the Bournemouth game. So Alex, I'll come to you. 5-1, Gareth Ainsworth. Would you be having a pound on that?
I think you mean Darian Johnson, not Gareth Ainsworth.
Yeah, Darian Johnson. Sorry, that Rovers connection.
I thought that the hairstyles had been transpose from one to the other, which is a pretty extreme change. But the only thing I'll add to what I said before about him is really don't think that this is I don't think this is the first job for somebody. This is not a job that you want as your first job in management. I don't think. You want someone who's got a bit of experience behind them, and those not applicables are a worry. We don't know anything about how he'd set the team up, what his preferred system is, how he'd like the team to play, what signings he'd like to bring in, which young players he likes and which young players he doesn't like, and which ones he'd want to get rid of. So it's an appointment where you'd probably only want to do it had you actually seen him in the caretaker role prior to the end of the season. And I think that's why some people were pushing for that. Get rid of MOWBRAY, bring Johnson and see how he does. It was to see how he'd do in a kind of a less pressured situation, like under Gary Bowyer, and then assess it in the summer. Whereas with Johnson right now, we have nothing to go off other than a Premier League 2, Division 2 win like 4 or 5 years ago, which was brilliant at the time, but it doesn't have any relevance to where the club is right now on the first team level and moving the club forward. So it would be an appointment that could be better than a lot of bad options. Don't get me wrong. You could do worse than Johnson, I think, but it's not the one that I would say is ideal at all for where the club is at the moment. Not with the size of the job. I don't think it's one for someone who's never managed before.
Go on, Elliot. I'll let you jump in. I know you're going to.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I don't really buy into they could have given him the last couple of games, or you should not be making an appointment of this size with the amount of uncertainty around the club based on the last 6 games of a season. If he'd come in with nothing to play for, that tells you absolutely nothing, in my opinion. And I think that you saw with like Frankie McAvoy coming in at Preston, that was a bad appointment. That was never going to work, but because he got 2 points per game over 8 games, and there was a bit of a manager bounce, suddenly he gets a 2-year deal or whatever he got, risk, and then he gets sacked after 4 months. That tells you nothing, in my opinion. So I don't think that would be. I think it would be too big a risk, and I don't think, even if he'd been given 6 games at the end of this season, I don't think that is a base to make your next decision of a manager on.
No, and those 6 games this season is, you could have we worked out you could have a completely different starting 11 next year based on players that are either loans are finishing, contracts are up, that kind of thing. We'll move on because I know we've got quite a few of those. I'll just say my bit on kind of Darian Johnson. I'll get his name right this time. So is it more of the same? Is he a MOWBRAY man? Is it going to be any different, or are we just kind of MOWBRAY the apprentice that moving on? And I think heart overhead, and he's cheap. And did the club look at it and go, well, he's already on the books. He knows the youth team. Won't have to spend much because he knows what he's working with. And that's the worry for me, is he's seen as the kind of the heart overhead option and the cheap option. So we'll move on. And we have another Johnson on the list. So if you want to flash that one up, I know this may cause some people to be a little bit upset, but Lee Johnson is in the betting. So he's a bit further out. He's 16-1. Last club was Sunderland. Any thoughts on him, Elliot? I'll come to you first.
I don't hate Lee Johnson. I think there's a lot of, from a coaching element, I think he definitely develops players. I think from a coaching point of view, there's a lot to like. I think that, is he the man to take the club to the next level and get them in the top 6? No. Is he the sort of person that can get you on the periphery of the top 6 and develop young players? Yes. So again, this comes back to, what do the club want? Where's the budget going to be? What's it going to be in line with? If you want someone that's probably going to guarantee you a top half finish, I think Lee Johnson's a decent shout. Will develop the young players, can get them on the periphery, like he did with Bristol City with a very young team. And there's a lot to be said for that. That's definitely not a criticism, but that, I think, is the sort of level of manager you're looking at between 7th and 12th sort of end. I think he's got, as I say, the coaching element. I like a lot of Lee Johnson. I thought he was harshly sacked by Sunderland with them second in the table, and you look where they are now. They just got in on the final day of the season with a very good manager in Alex Neil as well. So I think there's a lot to like. I think it had just gone a bit stale at Bristol City, and I think it was ready for a new voice rather than him underachieving there. And I could see him coming in and doing well. Could have seen him catapulting this team into the playoffs, not necessarily, but I think a lot of the young players would be excited potentially by his appointment. I think he would be good for some of the individuals. Collectively as a team, is he going to definitely guarantee you a top 6 finish and improve on what MOWBRAY's currently got them at? Not necessarily. All depends on budgets and things like that, as we've said.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull on one comment in there, which is the last one that's come up from FPL Dalmatian. They won't get many season ticket renewals with Lee Johnson in charge. I think that's a good point, is whoever the appointment is going to drive ticket sales. And it's critical for Rovers, is how many season tickets do you sell? How much money do you bring in? And yeah, I'll not mention that one. I'll just let that flash up. But I have a few friends.
I do think he is a bit of a divisive character. I do think there's some, but I think he's a bit Marmite, Lee Johnson, with some of his comments in terms of you love him or hate him. But I'm putting that to one side. I think from a coaching perspective, I think it'd be an okay fit. It wouldn't be your first choice, but I don't think it would be horrific.
No, and he did do a decent job at Bristol City, and look at where they've kind of ended up since he's left through one manager or another. Alex, before we move on, any kind of quick comments on Lee Johnson?
I agree that he's quite a divisive figure. I think that's mainly because of the way that he conducts himself on the sideline and all the things that go along with that. I wouldn't see that going down great with the fans, although I agree that you could do a lot worse. He does have championship experience. But it does concern me a bit about the Sunderland job. I know that he kind of got bombed out the club pretty fast. It was a 6-0 loss to Bolton, wasn't it? That was the end for him.
But they were third in the table and only 2 points off.
They were going fairly well at the time, and it was kind of a sudden bombshell that hit the club, and then he was gone. So it's difficult to say, and it's difficult to judge him on the Sunderland job when so many have failed at Sunderland, to be fair. So it would be harsh for me to say that. But if I'm being honest with myself, it's not one that I'd look to appoint, and I think am I not the only one who just doesn't like him very much? I'm just not. I don't personally.
I think there's a lot of people that are the same as you, and I would agree. He wouldn't. Yeah, I think someone just put it in the comments there. I don't think he would inspire many. I think he would be one that could potentially come in and probably maybe surprise a few, but he's not going to get season ticket sales up, and he wouldn't be my first choice either. I just think that when you try and break it down, it could be a little bit worse.
Yeah, I think Marmite is the perfect description, isn't it? You have him, love him, hate him, and I was going to say I've got quite a few friends that are Sunderland fans, and they're very much in the latter of that, the hating him kind of point of view. But look where they were when he left, when they got rid of him. So and where they've ended up. So we'll move on to the next one. So the next one we've got, I don't think will be as divisive. So we've got Daniel Farke there. So for me, I think he's moved in odds wise to 2-1 today. He was quite a bit bigger than that yesterday, which I know a couple of the Rovers Chat team had a nibble on. For me, he would be the best candidate for me. I think if you had a blank check and there was no kind of financial restrictions, he's out of a job. Go ask him what he wants. He's proven track record in the Championship. His football's pretty good to watch as well. So let's not forget that we pay money to be entertained at Ewood. I think for the most part this year we have been. We'd want that to continue. So, Alex, I didn't let you have much to say on Johnson, so I'll give you the floor for Daniel Farke.
Yeah, well, the only thing I'll say about Farke that I haven't already said is that if you could pick anybody as the outstanding candidate and you could kind of take away all the variables that may factor away from him, then there'd be nobody else that I'd even talk about bringing in. He'd be the absolute number one choice for me. But as I've said before, the big issues with Farke are more the off-field things and would he be interested in the job or not, and all the things surround that. So yeah, he would be the outstanding candidate to coin a Mike Cheston phrase about Owen Coyle, but Daniel Farke would be the outstanding candidate.
Yeah, and yourself, Elliot, anything to add to that? I know we've talked about.
I would agree. I would agree. I think the big question is more to be asked of Daniel Farke, and is he interested in what sort of assurances would he get from the Blackburn board about budgets and things like that? But even at Norwich, when you look at the job where he first came in at Norwich, they got a massive wage bill. He had to cut that wage bill down massively and bring through the young academy players. So he has got that ability to do it. I just think his stock is so much higher now than it probably was when he came into Norwich, or even that he's probably the big, he's the Championship manager that's out of work that's got the highest stock at the minute. I think every single club that sacks their manager towards the end of the season or the start of next, he will be that Chris Hughton, that Chris Wilder, the name that's on everyone's lips instantly. I think if he's interested and he's willing to come, I think I would agree that he's the outstanding candidate and give him the job. But I have slight reservations about whether he will get the assurances he would want if I was Daniel Farke. He might not want those reservations, as I say. But me putting myself in his shoes, I would think that it would be a coup for Blackburn Rovers to get Farke rather than the other way around, as disappointing as that might be for some to hear. But you've got to be realistic about the situation and where Blackburn are and where Daniel Farke is at the minute.
Yeah, and I think if you're Farke, you look at it and thinking, do I want the hassle of that? Or, like you say, he's in a position to probably handpick his next job from teams that are going to be without a manager.
For example, if like West Brom have a bad start next season, they could boot Steve Bruce out. And the resources they've got, is he going to wait his time? And you would, if you're looking at Blackburn and West Brom with resources from an outside point of view, I think Farke would go in there, personally.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing you've got to think. So it depends how desperate he is to get back in.
Yeah, and I think actually I was a bit surprised with some of the comments that were in there. It wasn't all 100%, let's go with Farke. So there was a few people in there saying they wouldn't have him. Interesting to know, pop it in the comments, why not, kind of thing. I know we've talked about the kind of, he gets you to the Premier League and then you drop off, but I think we'd all take that and we'll kind of deal with that problem down the road.
Rovers would love to be a yo-yo club for a couple of years, wouldn't they?
Exactly, yeah. And I think just also worth saying is that Darian Johnson has come out better at this than Lee Johnson from the comments in the poll. So I don't know if that's a shock or not, but it's worth pointing out.
He has the Mark Warburton as well after my.
I'm not going back to Warburton again. So we'll move on to the next one. I've already tried to talk about him once. So we've got Gareth Ainsworth. So he's obviously at Wycombe at the minute. He's done very well with Wycombe. I think he was at QPR for a bit before that. He's been at Wycombe. He's got 492 matches. The experience is there. 39% win percentage, and an average points per game of 1.71. Blackburn boy, I believe. He used to play for the club. 5-2. I think he's either joint or a second favourite now, just in case those odds have changed. Overhead for me again with this one is he's a Blackburn lad, and I think that's why he kind of gets the kind of appeal from people. For me, if he wasn't a Blackburn lad, I don't think we'd probably be talking about him, and I think that's the worry. Is I know some of the Rovers Chat team have said about his style of football at Wycombe and whether that lends itself to how we want to play and what we want to see, but then it's a question of, well, is he playing to what his means are down there and knowing that that's the best he can get out of that squad? If so, he's probably doing a phenomenal job there with how he's done. I think they made playoffs again, didn't they, this time?
Yeah,
so they're going to be in the conversation again for championship if he gets them promoted again. I suppose that's another question. If they go up, is he going to want to leave again, or does he want another stab? So I'll come to you first this time, Elliot. I know we've talked about him already, but anything to add to what we've already said?
I would completely agree with what you've said. I don't know whether the style of play is due to the limitations of the budget and quality of player he's got at Wycombe, or whether it's because of his personal preference. And that concerns me a little bit. I think he would sell season tickets. I think a lot of people would enjoy him. I think he'd be probably a dream to work with from a media perspective. So from my point of view as a job, that I think he'd be good to work with. Would he be? The football wouldn't be my cup of tea, and it depends where you want to go. Are you prioritising results, or are you prioritising style of play? From what I've seen in terms of style of play, it's not a team, as a football supporter of my own team, that I would particularly want. But he's a Blackburn lad. I think he would create a bit of a siege mentality, us against the world. Looking at what Nathan Jones has done at Luton, for example, that sort of underdog mentality. I think he can create that. I think he's done an exceptional job at Wycombe. And I would be interested to see of what does a Gareth Evans with Blackburn Rovers team look like with better resources, better quality of player than he has at Wycombe, with no disrespect. That's a fact. And how would that develop? I don't know. That's a lot of questions to ask. I do think the fact he's a Blackburn lad would, sell more season tickets, would get more fans on board than, let's say, if you put a different name with his track record, look at Mike Duff at Cheltenham, for example. Different style of play, but that sort of lowly manager. Don't think as many people would plump for him. So he wouldn't be my choice from a personal point of view, but I think they could do a lot worse, and I think it's someone that would rouse the fan base.
So there's nothing that you're aware of in the whole campaign for season tickets of one of our own that's the way they're going, then they're not already teasing us with that?
No, as I said at the start with the caveat, I've been off the last couple of days, so the digging will very much start tomorrow.
Yeah, I think with Ainsworth, there's quite a few comments on that, and I think one that Michael Pearson's put in there is nearly 500 games is more than an emotional perspective. 500 games is a lot of games in management. One thing that is a bit of a question for me though is he came up with Wycombe and went straight back down again. The recruitment that we need this summer with the players that we know are leaving, the loanees that aren't staying, the out of contract players, this is an open question because I don't know the answer. What's his recruitment like? Has he ever been given the kind of, you need to go rebuild a squad? And I'm not expecting either of you to have the answer to that.
I think he pulled some good signings when he was championship. Ikpeazu was a very good pickup from Hearts. He did really well and has gone to Middlesbrough. And I think he's good enough to play in the championship, but Chris Wilder's not fancied him. I think he'll be a good pickup for a championship club that's sort of mid-table to maybe bottom half. So probably not someone Blackburn would potentially really want to buy because they'd have to pay a fee as well because his contract to Middlesbrough. But he picked up some good players. Mehmeti's a good player that they sort of plucked from nowhere. Josh Knight, who was on loan last season with them last year, and is now at Peterborough on a permanent deal. He did really well. So I think his recruitment's, he's got a good track record in the recruitment market. Look how he galvanises players that you probably think are finished in football as well. You look at Sam Vokes, how good he's been for them this season, someone that was pretty washed up and done and could have easily fallen down the leagues. He's been brilliant. Gareth McCleary, someone brought in as a free agent about 10 games into last season. He's been a star player for them ever since. So I think he revitalises people probably into that are in their early 30s and that could easily fall down the leagues and probably not fancied by some. I think he's very good at putting their arms around some of those more senior players that need a bit of direction, like Vokes, like McCleary. David Stockdale is their number one as well, someone who's been very much out of the reckoning at Birmingham. So he does have that for him as well, which probably doesn't lend itself off the top of my head to too many Blackburn players, but I still think he could develop the young players as well. It won't be my choice, but I think there's still a lot of talking points that you can talk yourself into it, as I'm kind of doing now myself.
You'll be putting some money on him by the time we finished. And just to finish on that, Alex, anything to add on Ainsworth?
No, I think I've said what I need to say on that. But yeah, I think it would be a risk. And Venky's track record is that they don't often pay compensation for managers.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing as well. That makes it less likely for me, even though you have that hometown appeal of it. So that's just certainly something I wanted to add.
Thanks, Alex. And just the comment that popped up there, he's not one of our graphics, but I do like the idea of Daniel Alala getting injured, signing the contract to be player manager. So, the next one we're going to pull up is, I think it's kind of a new name today that's come about, is Philippe Cocu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So, for most, he'll be remembered for his time at Derby, which was, shall we say, less than successful. But in the comments before, I think was he at PSV as well, where he had a decent stint there, and that's probably what got him the Derby job. I have to say, it seems a long time ago he was at Derby. It probably wasn't that long ago, but it just feels like a long time ago. 25-1 is an outsider, but I think everybody that's listed there is just a name someone's chucked at Sky Bet without there being any real kind of rumour to that. So, Alex, I'll come to you. Philippe Cocu, any preference or non-preference?
It's not one that I'd be keen on, and I think it's probably me being tarnished by the way that Derby County has kind of ended. And I think you attribute the chaos at the club over the last couple of years in some way to him, even though probably it actually had nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
And the financial issues were well underway, and the seeds of that were planted quite a long time ago with the way that the club was run. So I think it would be unfair to pin all that on him. But I think you still view Derby as that, particularly last season, at the start of last season, as the club that we beat 4-0. They were in disarray and he was in charge then. So you would have to say, is there an issue there? Can he adapt to the Championship? He's got a great track record in Holland. There's no doubt about that. At a big club where you're expected to win the league every year. I know that it's PSV and not Ajax, but they'd still
got to be challenging. Yeah,
it's still got to be challenging for the league year in, year out at that club. So, and the pressure that goes along with that. So, he certainly has a lot of experience. But I think the thing that concerned me is that his last two jobs, I think, his job he's at Fenerbahce, I think it was, before Derby, and then at Derby itself, it kind of both ended in failures a little bit. So that would worry me. And again, you see these names in the media, and you do think, is this agent talk? Is it someone who's just trying to circulate the name back into the merry-go-round again? And you kind of get that vibe with him. So not one I'd be keen on, if I'm being honest. But that may be me being harsh, but and judging him falsely, because I know some Derby fans have said that actually it's unfair to judge him on his time at Derby, and that they think if he was given more time or was there under better circumstances that he would have done a good job. So I suppose I've got to qualify what I've said with that. So, not one I'd be keen on, but again, not one that would be a disaster, I don't think.
He was actually there longer than I thought. He was there for 65 games at Derby. I didn't think he was there that long, but a win percentage of 32% there. I think if we just flash the graphic up again, overall, he's probably got one of the better win percentages of the people we're talking about here. So the average points per game, not win percentage. In fact, both actually. But I think that's probably a reflection of his time before Derby and what he did then. So you can see, yeah, you got Koku 56. It's more than Farke and some of the others. So again, one of those don't get dragged in by statistics sometimes because over a long stint. He's not had a job since Derby. For me, that's a bit of a red flag. Is kind of it's 2 years ago since Derby. Any thoughts, Elliot?
I think he would need a lot of time. I think we saw with the Derby team, it took them a long time to adapt to his style of play. It took him half a season, in truth. It'd be good for him to... I would just say in terms of the off the field, he had absolutely nothing to do with the off field. The damage was done before. Like, if anything, he helped bring some of the young players through that have prevailed this
Sibley,
season.
Was it?
Yeah, Louis Sibley, Max Bird, Jason Knight, who have all been prevalent, Lee Buchanan, those sort of players. And it did take them 6 months to adapt to that style of play. I think the premise of his football is very good. Does it adapt to the Championship? I'm not sure. I think he'd probably end up being a better Premier League manager than a Championship manager, as daft as that sounds, because of the style of football and whether the players can do what he wants them to do, given how good a player he was as well. I think that frustration would come in a little bit, and I think Koku's a very good coach. Will it translate to Championship? I'm not sure it has. I think it would definitely be one that took patience and took time, because I think what he will be asking the players to do will be different to a lot of what they've done before. And maybe is it an effective tactic at Championship level? I'm not convinced. He wouldn't be my pick, but I think he's a better coach than I think a job at Championship level would probably reflect.
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? It's like you said, Derby just seems to me like just scrunch it up and throw it in the bin and just forget about that whole period. I think it's Tom had popped in the comments before, and I think we got it flashed up just about how Derby were doing. So worth mentioning, I guess, that at Derby they didn't do much better once he left, and were already clearly in disarray. Had them 9th the season before that. Would we take 9th next season? I know it's not a given, but I think we probably would, hopefully without the disarray off the pitch. So yeah, I think the interesting point about the Premier League, whether it'd be more suited to that as well, because the Championship is a slog, isn't it? It's a division on its own in terms of, I mean, Fulham 3-7-0 wins in a season. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? But we'll move on. So the next man we're going to put up is, help me out here, it's Rob Edwards. So Rob Edwards, Forest Green Rovers, who, correct me if I'm wrong, they've definitely got promoted. They won the league, didn't they? With
no, second. They've bottled it a little bit, and they're in second now, going into the last day of the season. Exeter are now top, but they're up.
It's not over, right. So they could still finish top. But
yes, they could.
Yeah. So that would be a 2-division jump, if I'm correct. Am I? Or am I completely wrong now?
No, that's right.
Yeah. So 2-division jump. So straight away for me, that's one down point to him is League Two, Championship. Two completely different levels. And also, if we're talking about Ainsworth and jumping from League One to Championship when he's already done it once, is this a big jump for him? But he's done a fantastic job at Forest Green. In terms of Forest Green as a club, their trajectory is upwards. So I think there'd be an element that if Blackburn Rovers come knocking and you've just come up from League Two, you're going to take the call. But is he going to want to leave? Does he want to cement his legacy there? It's, as I said, it's a big jump. So he's only got 52 matches there, so it's a very small sample size, but it's a very small sample size that looks pretty good in terms of how he's performed for them. So the worry there is it a flash in the pan, and does he get found out at League One level, never mind Championship? And for me, this is probably the riskiest of all the options that we've talked about, really, just given where he is and whatnot. So I'll come to you, Alex, first. Any thoughts on Edwards?
The truth about Edwards is he's not even the first manager I'd get from League Two, to be honest.
Oh, who would you go for then?
Who is then?
Well, I'd go for Matt Taylor.
Okay.
From Exeter. I think he's done if you look at the body of work, I think he's done a better job. He's on a lower budget, and he's really had to build with the youngsters at Exeter. Not only that, but he also comes from Chorley, by the way, just if you didn't know that, but which is very close to Blackburn. So
down the road from here.
Sorry,
that's just down the road from where I am.
All right, yeah. So that would be a localish appointment, but that's not very important. But I think the thing with Edwards, which will be most controversial, I think, is that it comes from that stable of managers from the agency that a lot of Rovers fans are very kind of wary of. The same agency that had like Keane and Coyle and various other Rovers managers. So I think that's one that would immediately create a level of hostility within the fan base that could go south very fast. And not only that, you have the fact that he's not only not had any championship experience, he hasn't even had any League One experience, and he's had no experience whatsoever in terms of managing a club. No disrespect to Forest Green Rovers, but managing Blackburn Rovers compared to Forest Green Rovers, there's a bit of a jump there, I think. So definitely not one that I'd be going for at all. But as I say, and yeah, as one of the comments said, Mark Hughes from Bradford, I'd rather have. But yeah, in all seriousness, not one that I would consider at all for a myriad of reasons.
So two things I'll come back to there. So the first one is quite a few comments in there about Souness, Hughes. I always feel that it seems like it'll always be as good as it was the last time. Farke is one of those that he didn't leave under any sort of cloud. He kind of went to City and it didn't work. And he seems I've always said with Farke, if he's got no money, he'll do a good job. If you give him loads of money, he's likely to not do as good a job, without using a worse word for that. But I just don't think you should go back. It doesn't work out as well as the first time. I'm sure somebody will pop somebody in the comments where I've completely got it wrong and someone's done better the second time round. But Souness, Nathan Johnson.
Not that I agree. I'm sorry, I was just being clear. I completely agree. I agree with your point entirely.
I just don't like Nathan Jones, so that's kind of why I'm scowling at that one.
I would agree. I would disagree just quickly on Rob Edwards. I could get behind that appointment. I would prefer that to a Mark Hughes or someone that's been over the hill and is. I don't understand the thinking why you wouldn't want someone like Rob Edwards, who's an up and coming coach, really good philosophy, great style of play, successful in his first year, over someone like Mark Hughes that's failed at multiple jobs in recent history. I know he's a bit of a Blackburn legend. There's someone coming neutral into that. What has he done recently that suggests he would be a better appointment than Rob Edwards? It would be a risk. Absolutely a risk. But I could get behind a Rob Edwards appointment. I think he's done a lot of great work at Forest Green. I agree that it wouldn't be my necessary pick. I think it's probably the wrong club for him, if I'm honest. I would be more wary of him, but I think they could do worse as a really good up-and-coming manager and someone that's done a lot of good work in his first year. But it's probably not the right club for him more than anything.
Yeah, I'll throw it back to you just quickly, Alex. The second thing I was mentioned was, what, just for those that perhaps aren't aware of it, what's the link with Edwards? And is it, I can't even remember that. Is it HSH, is it?
Yeah, so I think the link was that when the Venky's bought Blackburn Rovers, there was a big controversy around the role of certain agencies within the club and how they were involved in various aspects of the running of the football side of the club. And that's just been well documented for such a long period of time. I don't even need to go over that again, but I think its latest iteration, that agency, a lot of the managers that Rovers have employed under Venky's have come from that agency. And Edwards falls under that same agency, and you'd think that it would set him off immediately on the wrong foot with the fans if things started to go wrong. Now, I know that MOWBRAY's under the same agency, and MOWBRAY's overall had quite good fan support because of results, particularly in the League One season. But the point I'm trying to make is that a second that things go right and things go wrong, that fingers will be pointed at him and all of that kind of thing. And it will be, you got the job because you are linked to X, Y, and Z. And it would just be an unnecessary distraction and would divide the fans. And as I say, as a young coach, I don't think it's a bad option. But I think for the position that Rovers are in right now, and with the history with the fans and all of the controversy around that, I really don't want to go back there if we can avoid it. And I think there are better options out there for us.
So is he potentially the Coyle candidate this time on a very different spectrum? He's kind of the one that you would look at and there would be the earliest grievance potentially based on the appointment. And apologies, I'm putting you on the spot there because I know you've kind of mentioned it before, that's all.
Maybe not a Coyle appointment because maybe Edwards could actually be a manager. Maybe actually do some like tactical training on the training ground, like, rather than like iron brew and table tennis and things like that. So no, it wouldn't be on the level of a Coyle or anything like that. But I don't think it's one that would A, inspire the fans, or B, unite the club.
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's been good to talk about him because he is another option. He's obviously had a very good season this year and his stock is high at the minute. And yes, it would be compensation, but you would imagine just based purely on level that it would be less compensation. So probably doing him a disservice there. So we're going to move on. I've got 3 last people that we don't have. In fact, we've got graphics for 1, so I'll start with that one. So someone I kind of never really thought of as kind of going back into management, but I watched something on the Gary Neville podcast, I forget what that's called now, is Roy Keane. And I think Roy Keane, as a kind of manager, was pretty successful at Sunderland. I mean, the win percentage and the average points per game doesn't look great there, but I think that's probably skewed by his time at Ipswich more than anything. But if he's got that hunger to get into management, and you look at someone like a Lewis Travis or somebody who's playing in that position, you would get probably more than you're already getting out of Travis, which is pretty difficult. But he's a bit of a curveball. I personally don't think it would happen in a month of Sundays, but that kind of ex-professional type angle to this, who's maybe not keen, but someone who's done kind of like the youth badges and worked through all the systems. You got David Unsworth, who's just left Everton, people like that. Is that another avenue to look at? Maybe not the compensation. I personally don't think Roy Keane would want to give up his chair on Sky to come and work at Rovers and be that go-between with the Benkies, but in terms of an appointment, that would get bums on seats. That would get tickets sold. That would get a bit of, hopefully, excitement with the club. But Elliot, as I say, curveball there for you.
I've got quite strong opinions on this, and I think it would be a terrible appointment. I don't understand the attraction to Roy Keane. He's not managed for 5 years. He didn't do a particularly brilliant job. His last successful job was at Sunderland in the late 2000s, 2010. I would rather have Rob Edwards without a shadow of a doubt. I don't understand why any Sunderland fan wanted Roy Keane above Alex Neil. Alex Neil is a far better manager and has improved far more recently. I'd rather have Rob Edwards. I'd rather have Gareth Evans. I don't understand the attraction other than the fact he's a big name and did well 15 years ago. I don't get that one at all. And everyone seems to be more up for it than me. But whether it's at Sunderland or Blackburn, I just don't understand the attraction whatsoever. He's not done anything recently that makes me say he should be a better manager candidate to come into a modern club that's got a lot going wrong with it at the minute behind the scenes. Not a lot going wrong. Let me clarify that. A lot of uncertainty. That's what I mean. There's not a lot of clarity. Rob Edwards would be a far better appointment. For example, I need someone that everyone's considering at the bottom of the list. Mark Warburton would be a miles better appointment. I don't understand Roy Keane in the slightest.
That's fair enough, and that is the perfect response to that question. You can have all this good stuff about how good he was as a footballer, that drive and that passion, but actually, he's not managed.
It would be no different to Reading getting Paul Ince in, which has been yes, they've achieved the brief, but they easily should have been above that anyway. It was they were at the lowest ebb when he came in. They've done the job. Yeah, I don't get it. Not for me.
No, I like that.
He could come in and inspire everyone and do a brilliant job and make it look really silly, but looking at his managerial credentials on a piece of paper, just not for me. I don't understand it.
It could be an absolute disaster quite easily, given like you said,
I just think it's unknown. We don't know. We don't know how he would adapt to the Championship. He's not done anything successful or even been in management for 8 years, 5 or 8 years. He's not had a successful stint at a club since Sunderland, which was 15 years ago. So it's just a risk. I don't understand why you'd want to take it compared to someone like Rob Edwards. I'm not particularly keen on Rob Edwards, but we're saying he's definitely no. But we'd have Roy Keane ahead of him. That doesn't make any sense based on football philosophy, style of play, budgets, and recent track record. I don't understand that.
We'll move on from that then. It's a name that's come up a couple of times in the chat tonight, and we talked about him quite a bit last year, was Alex Neil. So Alex, seeing as you're called Alex, let's put it that way. The stars align. Alex Neil, he's at Sunderland in the playoffs. If Sunderland go up, I can't see him leaving Sunderland unless they go in a different direction. But if he became available, would you be interested in him? Would he be a good choice?
Would he be a good choice? Preston have a very similar budget to Rovers if you look at it, and probably have similar-ish expectations in terms of what they want to achieve season by season. Now, I know that won't go down well, and I know that we want to beat them every single season, but this is the first season we've beaten them since we got promoted, so there's got to be some realism to it. So I think Alex Neil is a more than competent Championship manager, and I would have him over many of the options that we've had listed today. Again, the stumbling block is compensation, and would he leave Sunderland, for example? I'm not so sure he would leave Sunderland, but you have to say that managers do want to be in as high a league as they possibly can, and if he does have roots set in the Northwest and a Championship job comes up, would he be tempted to just shortcut the process and join Rovers? So, yeah, certainly one that I wouldn't turn down, certainly one that would be better than a lot of options, and has got a promotion from this league. I know it was at Norwich, but has got a promotion from this league. So, yeah, one that would be far, far better than a myriad of names that we've talked about today. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't inspired by the talk of him last season. That's probably biased on how he'd done at Preston. And I felt like he was on the coattails as, was it Lambert at Norwich? And he kind of finished the good work that Lambert started before he went on his merry-go-round of managerial jobs that he somehow keeps getting every time he loses a job. But we haven't mentioned Lambert because we don't want to talk about that. I don't think his time at the club was massively enjoyable or successful. So we'll bring it to a bit of a close now. One person we haven't talked about, manager for next season, is Tony Mowbray. We kind of hinted at this earlier on. He's still the manager. He's still Blackburn Rovers manager. God, that picture's going to make me cry in a minute. I get emotional. But he could be offered a new deal. There's the potential that Venky's want to keep him on, and they've kind of, I think, Mowbray may actually turn that down. It's not going to happen. No, you're right. I think you're right there. So
I think Tony Mowbray's made his mind up. He's not, even if they offered him a new deal, he's not going to sign it. He will not be the manager next season of his own volition, regardless if the Venky's decided randomly they want him to be the manager next year. He won't accept it. He said he's not going to stay. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I said earlier, I think he was always going to end when his contract was up anyway. I think there was the video with Lenihan presenting the birthday cake, and at that point you could see this is kind of it. If we go up, I'm going to go out on a high. If we don't, I'll leave the door open for somebody else. So we'll go for Mowbray, and we've got the graphic, so we'll put it up anyway. It's just hearsay, but Sean Dyche, what's his record like? I don't know if he's done much. So in terms of his win percentage and his points per game, he's nowhere near Philip Koku, so just bear that in mind. He's also from down the road, which obviously counts against him, but I think a lot of Rovers fans wouldn't be against him. Can you imagine if he comes in, gets us promoted, Burnley go the other way? I think if you mentioned before, Elliot, actually, and I don't like to talk about them down the road too much, but are they at risk of staying up and giving Jackson the job? And then you're kind of in that doesn't go well start next season. They start
definitely.
to drop off. And
definitely.
There is as you say, I can't see Dyche coming to Rovers, coming to the Championship, let alone coming to the Rovers. He should have a lot more suitors in the top division. So we'll kind of bring it to a close there. Before we finish, Elliot, you mentioned your podcast earlier. What's it called and where can people find it and listen to that?
Yeah, so I'm the host of the Championship Chat podcast, which is a podcast I set up during university, and we cover the division as a whole on a weekly basis. So going through all the matches, the latest news, and you can find that on Apple, Spotify. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at ChampChatPod24. It's in my bio as well on Twitter, so you can find it easily through that. And definitely worth subscribing and a listen if you want more insight into the general Championship, as well as obviously weekly updates from me on Blackburn Rovers.
Fantastic. No, that's great. I will definitely be giving that a download. I spend a lot of time in the car, so I love a good podcast, so I'll be giving that a listen. Alex, thanks once again for being on board. Thanks for your views. Thanks for your opinions. As always, it's been brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, for having me on, as always. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, it would be kind of a real damp squib if after all this it's announced like next week that Mowbray's signing a new contract, wouldn't it? Make us all look
Make me look very silly.
Yeah, it would make us all look a bit silly, wouldn't it? But in all seriousness, yeah, I think it's the end of an era, really. Like 5.5 years is a long time in club management now. Most Championship managers have a shorter lifespan than that. Yeah. And I think it's probably a time to just maybe thank Mowbray for what he's done and also critique him for things that maybe he hasn't done as well. But I think it's a time to appreciate the job that Mowbray's done overall. He'll go down as definitely the best manager in the last decade. Not that that's difficult, but he'll go down as someone that I think most Rovers fans will hold in high esteem for what he's done. And I think it's probably best for everybody that we have a fresh start in the summer. But the last thing I'd say is season starts late July, pre-season starts middle of June. We need a manager in the next 2 to 3 weeks, ideally. So it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. But yeah, thanks for having me on as always, Glenn.
No, fantastic. Thanks, Alex. And you're right, the pre-season will be here before you know it. And we've got half as many players, given how many people are out of contract and going. Elliot, thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely meeting you, having you on the show, and we'd love to get you back at some point in the future. You never know, we may do another one of these if Alex's worst fears come to fruition and we get into June and we've still not got anybody. So love that there. Hashtag next Rovers manager out. So someone's starting early there. But thank you very much for coming aboard, Alex. I really enjoyed having you on tonight. No
problem at all. Really enjoyed it. Anytime. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And last of all, thanks for all you guys for tuning in, for commenting. I'm sure most of you will be already, but don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell for the notifications for all the content. We'll be providing content throughout the summer. There might not be any Rovers games on, but we'll still be providing content, whether it's managers, players, friendlies, general Rovers 11s, that kind of stuff. So stay tuned, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you.